Now I'm going to talk about the Lorenz curve model. Uh, our purpose for doing this is, if we're going to talk about poverty and income, what we're looking at is what I would say is the most commonly used measure of that. So we're going to make sense of the measure of the thing we're talking about, and that's my primary objective. Um, We're going to start with a graph. This can be used. There's a statistic we can derive from that. I'll get to that in just a minute. You might have heard reference to this. They might not mention it by name, but particularly you hear about it fairly often in the context of, particularly you hear of the eroding middle class around these discussions. This model will show what people who are saying that are referring to very clearly. You particularly might hear this on MSNBC. I have that in my notes because Jared Bernstein is a contributor to MSNBC and a big proponent of what we're talking about here. When you hear of this, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about a model where on the horizontal axis we have the cumulative percent of households. If we have the cumulative percent of households, what are the bounds of this? What's the range? If we're talking about a percentage, the range that we're talking about is from 0 to 100. You can't have more than 100% of, say, American households doing anything because 100% is all of them. I mean, you can if you have some kind of measurement error or something, or I don't know what, but that's what we're talking about. So we're talking about a range of 0 to 100%. So let me put those in there on this axis. Okay. So that's 100% so far doing something. That would be that accomplishment, 100% doing something. Now over here, we have the cumulative percentage of all income earned. And income can be measured different ways, and that's something I'll circle back to at the end. This would be no income earned down here. But if it's the percent of all income earned, so it's all the income earned in a country. So the income is earned by the households of the country. Remember that in our circular flow model? That's on the bottom. It's what households use to purchase goods and services. So 100% of the income is ultimately earned by the population of a country. And it's in percentage terms, so it's all of the income. So this is also a number scale from 0 to 100%, just because of the way it's set up. It's the cumulative percentage of all income. So what we're saying then, it's right here, this is all of the income earned by all of the households. And so if we then have, if we think this through, then 50% of households might earn half the income, or 20% might earn 20% of the income, and so forth. So we're talking about a 45-degree line here, which for our purposes, what we're saying is, and I missed a little, this would represent, and this shouldn't really pass this because it's 100%, this would represent all of the income earned by all of the population, which is necessarily an outcome. All of the people have to earn all the income, and all the income has to be earned by the people because that's what income is. It's payments to those households, right? So what we're implying with this model is that this is perfect fairness because this is a necessary outcome. So along the way, if things are being distributed in perfect fairness, in a sense, half the income would be earned by half the population, right? 20% of the income would be earned by 20% of the population. It would be distributed across the population on a sort of this even kind of basis where I can't say it much differently except to rephrase it with subtle differences, where an equal portion of the population is getting the same proportion of all of the income. Of course, that doesn't happen. What we have happening, let's start with, say, 20% of the households. 20% of the households don't make 20% of the income that's being made out there. 20% of the households make something a little lower than that. Of course, 0% of the households are making 0% of the income. So we have two certain truths, here and here. But we have these other things along the way that are actually happening. Okay? 30%, I'm estimating, I'm not going to label these. 30% of the households aren't quite making 30% of the income. They're making maybe, if 20% was making like 18, they might be making like 22. And 50% of the households certainly aren't making 50% of the income. Half the households out there, the lower income half, are making, I don't have the numbers here exactly. I'm just going through the theoretical model. These are in your book. Say it's 30%. So 50-30 would be like here. So then what happens if we trace these through, I'm speaking hypothetically, the specifics are in there, and as we'll see, they change over time, and that's what's relevant, largely. If we trace these through, then we have this kind of a shape. Oops, missed the mark a little bit. We have this kind of a shape where the actual outcomes, let me make this a dotted line, are not perfectly evenly distributed through the population. In other words, half of the households in America are earning less than half of the income being earned. Or I think everyone's heard of the top 1%, or the textbook references the top 3% of income earners. That's only a small percent of the population, right? But they earn somewhere in the range of half of the income. So that's why the jump in income, when you get into this area, a small percent of the population is getting big jumps in the total income earned because they're earning a lot of income. So this is the most, I'd say, it's why it's in our book. It's the most commonly cited reference to income inequality that's out there. Now, what I'll do next is explore how we can look at this changing over time and what that means. We could also look at it over space. I don't think I'm going to delve very far into that, if at all. But this seems like, now that I've explained the background of the model, it seems like a good breaking point for videos.